Welcome back, everybody, to our Faith in Business Monthlies. It's great to be back together with you all today. And we think we've got a really exciting series coming up over the next few months, which we hope you'll really enjoy sharing with us and working with us on. So I'm going to share a short presentation that we've developed. And hopefully everybody can see that now. So our theme for this year is being productive, working from rest. And this is something that Peter has developed over the past few months, and we've all really adopted it very enthusiastically at Faith in Business. And I really like some of the wording in here, and particularly we often talk about resting from work. Well, this year we're going to try and think about working from rest means. And we've got some great introductions that will come from Peter and Ken and Chris in a few minutes. How we're going to explore this is through Faith in Business Monthly. And so we've got these 6 topics which explore the theme in more detail. And we'll be covering each one of these at each Faith in Business Monthly, leading up to our retreat at the end of April, which you'll be able to book into very soon as well. So we hope that you'll find this a really helpful way of exploring this theme, understanding it, and preparing for the retreat as well. And it's really going to be part of all of the resources and the events that we have at Faith in Business through this year as well. So you can see there at the centre is our theme, and at the top is our Faith in Business Monthlies, but also I think this week's God on Monday reflection starts to talk about working from rest as well, and quite a few of those will. So if you're not yet signed up to God on Monday, we do encourage you to contact Peter and join his mailing list. You'll get that each Monday, and it'll really help you to think through this theme as well as many other things as well. Faith in Business Prayer as well, which is a monthly prayer letter from Richard Higginson, and quarterly prayer meetings will pick up on the theme. And our journal as well, Faith in Business Quarterly, will have articles coming through there around this theme. And we encourage you, as you're listening in, talking with each other, thinking about this. If there's, if you feel inspired to write something for Faith in Business Quarterly, do get in touch with Richard Higginson or Peter or myself. We'll be very pleased to talk with you about that. And then the retreat as well at the end of April will have a focus on this, as our other retreats have done as well. And then finally, Peter and others from Faith in Business will be speaking and writing about this outside Faith in Business, including Peter's going to be doing a forward to a new book that Ken and his team are currently writing, very related to this topic. We're really excited as well that we have 2 theme partners for this year, and that's the Mockler Centre, which Ken Barnes heads up, and Stewardship, where Chris Gillies is the chair, so we're very grateful for them joining in with us on this. They'll be providing some of the speakers for our talk, so we also have opportunities for other people to talk if you would like, and helping us in many other ways as well. So we're very grateful to them, and they will in fact be introducing things today. So in a second, I'm going to hand over to Peter, who's going to overall introduce our theme, and then Ken will talk for a couple of minutes, and Chris.
I know it was only 1.
Yeah.
And I'll also try and mute everybody else who's not talking, and then we'll have a time for Q&A once they finish talking before we go into breakout rooms to explore things in more detail. So that's plenty enough of me talking. So I shall now introduce and hand over to Peter, the Director of Faith in Business. Welcome, Peter.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen. That's great. Well, I want to introduce you to someone called Angus. And Angus, when he goes shopping, cannot bear to be in a supermarket queue in which the person in front of him has lost their credit card. He also, when he gets home from work really late and his children are desperate to play with him, tells them that he hasn't got time and it's time for them to go to bed without a bedtime story. If he gets stuck in a traffic jam, he is beside himself with rage and doesn't know whether to turn around his car and go in the opposite direction or sit it out. And if there is anybody who works for him that is slower than he intended for the delivery of an item of work, he loses his temper or quietly simmers on his frustration. Well, I could go on about Angus, but I wonder whether you already recognize him, because it might be a bit like you and me. Well, at the start of Genesis, as Stephen alluded to, God gives his first command to human beings. I wonder whether you know what it is. You're too many to answer all that in unison. So it's the command to work. First thing God says to humans they are to do is to work. But immediately after giving them this command, he takes a day off. He rests and he institutes the Sabbath as a day of rest. So this means, if you think about it, that for us human beings, our first full day on earth was a day of rest. 6 days of work were coming, and in the light of that, a day of rest. And this is reflected in the fact that for centuries, Christians have, until quite recently, regarded its day of rest, Sunday, as the first day of the week. The week starts with rest. Of course, we've lost that, and we tend to think of Monday now as being the first day of the week, and we talk about the weekend as the week end. There'd be very good Christian grounds for calling the weekend the week beginning, or the weekend, Saturday, and the week beginning. So we could wish our colleagues a good weekend and week beginning rather than just a good weekend. I'm not suggesting we do that, but that's the logic of the way for centuries Christians have thought about the day of rest. It's not at the end, it's at the start of the week. And we see the principle of working from rest rather than resting from work in the life of Jesus. The gospel writers show him withdrawing frequently to find solitude before intense periods of ministry. And he urges his disciples to do exactly the same. On one occasion, they find themselves involved in a major food distribution operation to feed a crowd of 5,000 people. And right before they do, Jesus says to them, "Come away and get some rest." So Jesus did it before his intense times of ministry, and he gets his disciples to do likewise. Now, all of this could just sound like the basis for some sage advice about coming apart before we fall apart. But the Bible doesn't stop with just sage advice in its teaching on rest. And if you track with us through this year, 2023 to 24, the academic year, which will culminate in our retreat, we will find that rest is at the very center of the gospel. The Bible presents rest as the reason why the gospel is good news. It shows that at the heart of God's offer of salvation in and through Jesus Christ is the offer of rest. Jesus makes this offer very explicit in words that will be familiar to you. Come to me, all you who are weary and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Wait a minute. He's talking about rest, but he's using the image of a yoke, an image of work. So what I think Jesus is saying is, I'm not offering you an escape from the burdens of life. Life is burdensome. If you love, you will have burdens. If you live, you will have burdens. Life is full of burdens. I'm giving you a yoke, but it's an easy yoke. So I think in that promise, we see work and rest coming right together where they belong. Stephen showed you earlier an image of fruit growing on a kind of vine. They're red currants. And the Latin word ruler is actually the word from which we get a rule for life, which we could say that keeping the Sabbath is a rule for life. But that word is also used for trellis, which keeps up a bunch of red currants and allows them to grow, or grapes and allows them to grow. So a rule of life isn't something that is legalistic. It is something that supports flourishing or fruitfulness. Jesus wants us to be fruitful and abide in the vine, but he offers us in his teaching on the Sabbath and on rest a trellis to support us. We're looking at a trellis this year. That's why partly why we've chosen that image. A rule of life is like a trellis. Just one word about productivity, because when we look at fruit, we can think, well, we should talk then about fruitfulness. And the Bible talks about fruitfulness, and it is, in fact, a more biblical and theological theme than the word productive. So just briefly, one word about why we've chosen being productive. One reason is because we've just seen a human being being made, and that being, and it's not said of any other being that's mentioned in Genesis, is a productive being. A being productive. So there's double meaning there if you call that. Being productive is a human being. But also that produce is another word for fruit. If we go to a stall somewhere, we find a stall of produce, a produce stall with fruit and vegetable on it. So it can be used for fruit. So we simply mean, when we use the word productive, we mean fruitfulness. But productive is more a word that's used in business language, so we've chosen that word, but what we mean is fruitful. So as we embark on this journey, and I'm coming to the end of my few remarks and I'll hand over to Ken, think of where we're starting off. We're starting off with a world of Anguses like ourselves. And we find that there's rising levels of stress-related mental health issues around us. We find there's lots of anxiety, particularly amongst teenagers, about the future. We're finding neglected children and old people because those who can care for them have not got time. And we're finding record levels of burnout and nervous exhaustion and nervous breakdown. So could it be that we need to rediscover God's gift within the midst of a working life of rest? Now over to my great friend. I've worked with Ken for years as a colleague. He's also a friend, and he's here to offer his remarks from the background of the work he's doing at the Mockler Center. Ken, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. It's wonderful to be here. Hello, everybody. Good to see you again. I've seen many of you on these broadcasts or at the retreat last April. It's just great to be back. So let me just give you a little background, if I may. A few years ago, I wrote a book called Redeeming Capitalism. And by my own admission, it was a can-do book, not a how-to book. In it, I examined whether or not we could take this thing called capitalism and conduct ourselves in ways that were reflective of our values as Christians. And even in wider society, could we have a kind of capitalism that really reflected things the way God intended them, not the postmodern capitalism is the term I use, which is really in many ways detrimental and out of control. And I'm happy to say that the book was very well received, but people wanted a can-do book. They kept saying, well, okay, you've convinced us that this is possible. I mean, that's the can-do book. They wanted a how-to book. How do we do it? Well, so I didn't want to answer that question because I'm not qualified to answer that question. None of us are. It's something that's going to have to come from the market itself and from the church and from thought leaders and even policymakers. But I did convene a group of people at Bretton Woods in New Hampshire, economists and theologians and church leaders and business leaders, practitioners like many of you. And we, over several days, started to unpack what are the problems that you face, what are the stresses that you feel that causes so much of the anxiety that Peter was referring to. And I ended up with a list as long as my arm of things that are really burdensome to people, that are really causing an awful lot of the poor health and even some of the ill will in the marketplace that is something that we experience and also read about. And the question then became, okay, now, if this is the case, is there an antidote? Does the church, does the gospel have any kind of an antidote to this constant, unrelenting pressure that people are feeling? Because it's easy to blame technology or blame the market or blame something, but as someone once said, it's easy to curse the darkness. It's much more difficult to light a candle. And so I brought the fellows of the Mockler Center together at Gordon Conwell, and these are people from Harvard and from other institutions, economists, theologians, philosophers, socio-economists, journalists, all kinds of people who are part of the Mockler Center. And we started to think deeply about what the gospel might offer, and we came up with Sabbath. And specifically when in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus says something which turned the whole thing on its head, and that is that Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And so we really started to explore not just the Sabbath with the definite article, which is, if you will, the religious ordinance that is given to us in Scripture to remember what God did, but Sabbath as a principle, and Sabbath as a prism through which we view all economic activity. And if we do that, then it's going to affect our priorities. It's going to affect our relationships. It's going to affect how we use our time, how we use space, etc. And so we began to unpack these, and the result is a book, which we hope will be coming out fairly soon, called Redeeming Sabbath, or Sabbath as Resilience. And my dear friend Peter has offered to write the foreword to that. And so when I was at the conference, I mentioned to Peter, I said, Peter, you know, we've got this great content with these really interesting scholars from all over these different disciplines who understand the marketplace and business. Maybe we could do something together over this next academic year to continue to unpack this topic. And that's how we ended up together doing this. So once again, my dear friend Peter and I, we've been doing this for 10 years now, are doing this. And in addition to that, we've got Chris Gillis, who is from a wonderful organization called Stewardship, and he is going to be part of this project as well. So I really look forward to introducing you to these wonderful scholars and their thinking about Sabbath, and hopefully kind of broaden your understanding of what Sabbath actually is. So with that, I will turn it over to my dear friend Chris.
Chris, just unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Ken. Hello, everybody. Hope you can hear me now. Great to be with you all. And I think some of you know I've spent about 40 years working in financial services, trying to figure out the hard way how to be a light in some quite dark workplaces at times. I retired from financial services in 2020, and one of the things I now work at is being a trustee and chair of the Council of Trustees at a wonderful organization called Stewardship. And I'm just going to share my screen with you and use a few slides just to help my talk. Here we go. Then you will see a nice bright yellow slide. Thumbs up, wonderful. So Stewardship is a charity in the UK. It connects about 60,000 generous Christian givers each year with roughly 2,000 individual mission partners, 4,500 churches, and 6,000 different charities. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about what it means to be a good steward. And we also spend quite a lot of effort trying to generate thought leadership on what it looks like to be generous if you're a Christian. And often these concepts are applied to money, but I'm very excited by the prospect of thinking about what it means to be a good steward of our time, and also what it means in the context of being productive. What does it mean to be generous with our time? And those two characteristics, if you will, are going to be the themes that we try and run through the stewardship contribution to this series of talks and also to the retreat. So here's an interesting number. Who knows what's significant about the number 168? Too many of you on screen to be able to ask you for an answer, but it's pretty straightforward. If you work in the world of productivity services, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day equals 168 hours. 168 hours in the week. And it's interesting, Jesus had 168 hours in his week. Mother Teresa's got 168 hours in her week, and there's 168 hours in my week. And it's really interesting to think about what we have received in teaching and what we have learned about these 168 hours. Now, in my world, I've been around churches for probably nearly 50 years. And I've heard a lot about the importance of getting a good night's sleep, and the Bible talks a lot about sleep. So let's assume for a minute that we spend 8 hours a day trying to go to sleep, being asleep, and trying to wake up. And then I've heard a lot of Christian leaders teach about the importance of a daily quiet time, the importance of being part of a church community and going to church on a regular basis. And if you're really committed, maybe joining a small group and volunteering for something. So let's assume, an hour a day is quiet time, 7 hours, 2 or 3 hours on a Sunday at church. And everybody will have a slightly different schedule, a couple of hours for a small group. But if you do the math, that leaves you with 100 hours. And I've heard very, very little about how we should spend those 100 hours. And I'm really excited that over the coming months, we might talk about the possibilities of stewarding that 100 hours well, the possibility of investing that 100 hours wisely and generously, and what that might look like. And I've, broadly speaking, identified a number of buckets of activities that we might spend time on. I call them the big five, and I think certainly my life has been a continual journey, sometimes a struggle, of how to balance these big five. And I've put them in a sequence that I think is probably the sequence that I have heard church leaders teach about the most. That the most important thing you can do with your time is to develop a personal relationship with the Lord. That family is very important, and we all have different kinds of families. We all have different shapes of families. Some of us have young children, some of us have no children, but there is a dimension to human life that involves family. We're taught to honor our father and mother. As Peter's already explained, we were made to work. One of the first tasks that God gave us was to be fruitful and multiply, to be productive. And I think also we see from both Old and New Testaments, but particularly the New Testament, the importance of communities, the importance of koinonia, of church, and of building some kind of community, of reaching out to people with the gospel, and the very simple fact that we were made to be relational beings. And finally, we have time for rest, for keeping fit, for pursuing hobbies, and doing some fun things. And in the experience I've had so far, the Christian teaching I've received would put those things almost in that order of priority. And so I'm extremely excited to explore the possibility that rest, exercise, leisure, recreation might actually be the critical enabler that brings life to my personal walk with God, that my personal walk with God might be part of resting in him, that my family, work and community life might be enriched if I come from a place of Sabbath rest, and am energized and refreshed by that rest to be at my most productive. And so if you like, I think this whole series challenges the classic sacred secular divide that says certain parts of life are more sacred than others. And this essentially turns it on its head and says, actually, all of life has the potential to be sacred. And if we work from a place of Sabbath, we can transform not only our workplaces, but also our families and our communities.